Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a preview. This one is for Dungeonology. It's from Ludus Magnus Games, and it is a dungeon crawler. However, there is a twist to this one. You're not actually doing combat with the citizens of the dungeon.
No, you are going to be building kind of a dungeon, exploring an area, encountering all sorts of, well, not monsters, but information about monsters, because that's what you're doing. You're going out there and trying to collect information so that you can submit your thesis once you think you know enough about the monster.
So to give you an idea about the game, as David already alluded to, you are students from a local university who are delving into a dungeon. Each one of the dungeons is going to have a very specific clan that is involved with it. For the preview, we have the Fawn clan, but there's going to be a variety of different ones. All these are going to have different tiles, different types of panic cards, different types of bosses, and different type of creatures you're going to interact with and look at. However, the twist is you're not doing combat with any of these guys. You're just kind of looking around and trying to get information about them, which is broken into a number of different colored cubes, which represent things like their militia, their caste system, the riches that they have in their dungeon, and then trying to submit a thesis with that.
Yeah, and these information cubes you're going to find on all of the tiles that you put out there. Every time you explore a new tile, you're going to flip that over and put it out there. It's going to have a certain number of cubes, certain colors of cubes that represent those different categories. You're going to want to go there, you're going to want to study to collect those cubes so that you can gain enough information to finish the game.
Before we get too deep into it, let's talk about the fact that this is a prototype version of the game. Everything that you see here is just a prototype. It's going to be changed in the Kickstarter version. Obviously, make sure you guys go there to see the final versions. However, looking at it, it looks very, very beautiful. Basing it off of what we saw from Black Rose Wars from them last year, this is a beautiful production of a game.
Yeah, and one really cool thing about their miniatures, particularly on this game, they have a very sort of cool, almost animated look to them. Very, very clear, incredible detail on these things. Like we said, this is a prototype, but as always, they've given us some really nice miniatures.
So you're going to have a boss miniature, you're going to have miniatures for each of the scholars, is what you're going to represent, and then you're going to have miniatures for the different students. There's two types of students in the game. There's good students and bad students. The good ones are represented by the grays. These are going to fill up within the campfire. You're going to collect these to your board and be able to use them to power cards in the game. And then you have the red ones. These are called the Omega Brotherhood. These are going to stack up on this card and eventually progress towards the end game. The game could actually end in two very different ways. One, by having 5 of them on these cards, 4 on the main card, and 1 on a random panic card on the bottom. Or if someone submits their thesis. I know we keep saying this, we'll get to how you do that. Let's talk about the other components in the game, however. There's a variety of different tiles. These are going to represent the dungeon tiles. There's going to be the main one. This is the encampment. The special thing about the encampment is that's where everyone's going to start. It's also the place where you have to go back to rest. And it's also completely immune from other players' attacks. In this game, it is a competitive game, so you are going to be hurting other players and trying to slow their progress from collecting cubes. There's a variety of different types of tiles. You have level 1, level 2, and level 3, and they progressively have more information in them, and they're progressively harder to scope out when you go to those areas.
So we mentioned scholars earlier, and everyone's going to be playing a scholar. You're going to get a scholar card, and it's going to slide into the scholar board. On this side of the board, you're going to have all of that information that we talked about that you're going to be collecting, all the way from civilization, which is the most plentiful out there in the world, all the way up to caste, which is probably the rarest. You're also going to have this dial up here that's associated with your stealth and the alertness that you're going to have to sort of test against throughout the game in a variety of different ways. Over here on the character card, the scholar's going to have 4 number stats and then a couple spots here that have different combinations of cubes. These are going to relate to the number of students you can collect when you're collecting students. This is going to be a currency you're going to be spending throughout the game quite a bit. The number of cards that you can hold in your hand, your movement speed, the number of information cubes you're able to collect when you do study in a spot, and then those last 2 spaces, like I said, are going to have a couple different combinations of cubes. Once you've collected certain types of information, you're going to be able to adjust this dial that we mentioned before, and the other one's going to let you peek at a card in the game so that you have more information when you submit your thesis.
The important thing to know about the cubes on here is they're each worth an individual amount of points. Your greens are only worth 2 points each, and then your casts are worth 6, with a range in them depending upon which one of the information cubes you're collecting. And that's actually tracked on the board too. It's kind of hard to see here, but as you collect more cubes, you're just slotting them there and giving you more points at the end of the game. On some of these tracks too, they're going to see 2 very important things you need to know. One is that downward arrow, which you already showed. Each time you meet one of those, you're going to be able to spin that dial, meaning you're going to be more stealthy in the dungeon. The other one are the stars. Now this is incredibly important. At any time in the game, you get 2 stars anywhere on your board. That allows you to submit your thesis. That's the only time in the game you're allowed to actually submit your thesis. But it also is going to make you a little more powerful than the other players. And there's a catch-up mechanic in this game. And that's if you have more stars than the other players at the table, everybody's allowed to take their character and flip it over to the other side.
Yeah, the other side is going to adjust their abilities. This is called the exalted side. Like Jeremy said, this is a catch-up mechanic. They become a little bit stronger. I played a character who is able to move twice the movement that he could before. It allows you to get a lot more done, obviously, in order to maybe get your stars. Once someone gets as many stars as the player who had the lead, they're going to flip their card back over, and that can happen back and forth.
The other things you need to know about the game are the campus board itself. You're going to see the campfire. Anytime you draw students, you're going to draw an X number of students from this green bag. And I'll talk about how this is seated in a moment. And they're going to sit around the campfire. Anytime you need to take students, you can only take them if they are sitting in the campfire. If they're not there, you don't get to take any students during a rest action. These two cards are extremely important. The top card is showing you the difficulty of the game. This game can be played at easy, medium, or hard. And that's going to mean that more alertness can be introduced to the zone, less of the gray characters can be put in the bag, so the ratio of reds is going to be more important. And at the very bottom of that, you're going to take one of these panic cards, meaning that anytime you get to the fifth one by placing red students, we'll talk again about that in a moment, this is going to be flipped over. There's a variety of these different panic cards. They're all going to do something different, but what they all do is they progress the speed of the game rapidly. They're going to end the game very quickly. Again, the game can only end when this happens or if someone submits their thesis. Now, the final thing you need to know on this board is the actual clan card itself. There are a variety of different clan cards for each one of the factions. You're going to randomly select one of these, and you're going to place it here face down. This clan card tells you when you submit your thesis how many points you need to earn in order to actually be correct or be successful in submitting. It's also going to give you a range of values for all those information cubes that you've collected, but it can modify those ranges. So unless you know what this value is, your greens may not be worth 2, they may be worth 3, or they may be worth 1. So it's very important to figure out how to get this flipped over to be able to look at for you.
Yeah, and there's just a few more things on the table here before we get into how you're playing the game. There's a number of cards. I'll let Jeremy talk about those. I'm going to talk about the boss. There's a boss creature that can be introduced into the game in a number of different ways depending on what scenario you're playing, depending on the boss that you're still playing. But we have a miniature and this card. Once he's introduced, this one in fact will start moving around the board based on different trigger mechanisms that will have him go around and affect your abilities. It may exhaust you. We haven't talked about exhaustion, but your scholars can get exhausted and you'll have to rest. So this guy's just basically going to make things a little bit more difficult to collect all that information that you're trying to get for your thesis.
There's 4 other stacks of cards. I'll go through them briefly. There are the interns. There are cards in the game that allow you to collect interns. These interns can give you extra victory points of the game. They're going to sit off to the side of your player board, but they also give you some kind of ongoing ability, usually protecting some of your cubes from being stolen from other players. You have randomizer cards. There are cards in the game that can tell you to move north, east, south, or west, or to introduce certain kinds of information cubes, or to lose certain ones. These are going to be determined by the randomizer cards. And these are jinx cards. There's a variety of different things that will allow you to become jinxed in the game. Jinx are bad because they're all worth negative victory points, but they all give you some kind of negative ability through the course of the game. And the only way to get rid of these is by resting. The big cards, though, that runs the entire game are called the trick cards. These are extremely important. There's 6 different kinds of trick cards, and these are multi-use cards. They come in such things as fate cards, exploration cards, magic cards, social cards. There's a variety of them, but they're all broken down into 3 different categories. You have the bonus value at the top. That's used to combat that alertness within the dungeon. You have the main ability in the center, which is usually used by powering students, getting rid of students, drawing students from the bag and doing something. And then you have the auxiliary power at the bottom. These are usually reactionary to be able to hurt or interact with other players.
Yeah, and when we say multi-use, these are definitely multi-use cards. Those are the 3 sort of categories on each card, but when you're looking at these things on your turn, you got to know that if off turn you're using cards against people, which you will definitely be doing, you're going to start your turn with fewer cards in your hand. So there's a lot of tough, sort of difficult decisions to make of when you want to use these cards and how you want to use them.
Right, the game is going to take place in turn order, starting with the first player. Everyone's going to go through 5 steps on their turn, and then it's going to be the next player's turn. The steps are this. The very first thing that you can do on your turn is to submit your thesis. Now remember, in order to submit your thesis, you have to have cubes that equal at least 2 stars, and there's a variety of different stars on your board. Once you do that, you can say, okay, I'm going to submit my thesis. When you do, you automatically teleport back to the encampment. That's number 1. Then you get to, for free, look at this card that you normally cannot look at. You're going to look at it, and you're going to look at this value. If you meet those points on your board with the information, including all the modifiers on the below, guess what? You are correct. You're successful. The game is going to end for you. And then it's going to trigger this panic card, meaning that everyone now is on a timer to be able to do something. And that's going to change depending upon the panic card that you have. If you don't meet this, again, you're going to put it back down, face down in secret. You're going to take a jinx card, and you're going to basically lose one of your information cubes, whichever one is worth the most victory points. So if you have one that's in the 6-point cast, you're going to throw that out of the game and lose it as a penalty for guessing what the thesis may be.
And even if you lose there and you fail, you still gain the information about what's on that card. So you have a little bit more information than everyone else at the table about what you're needing to do and how many points you're needing to collect in order to even try to finish the game.
Now remember, the other way to know what that card is by collecting a specific combination of cubes and getting a discovery token which you place here. Once you do that, you can anytime look at this card before submitting your thesis. That's the natural way you want to do it. But there may be times in games where you have a lot of cubes and you're just like, I'm going to take my chances, I'm going to guess, and you can do that.
So the other thing you can do is rest. You force to rest if you have 3 exhaustion tokens, but you can rest at any time you want. When you rest, a number of things are going to happen. You're going to be able to get rid of your exhaustion tokens. You're going to be able to draw back up to your hand limit size if you're lower than that. You're also going to be able to draw students from around the campfire if you're lower than what you have. So you're going to be able to draw back up to those things, getting some very necessary currency in your hand and on your table in order to power your card.
And probably the most important thing that happens when you rest is you get to get rid of one of your jinx cards, giving you points back and then losing one of those negative abilities. Anytime you rest, you're also going to end your turn. So you don't get to take steps 3, 4, and 5, which we're going to talk about. Step 3 is movement. You're going to look at your character and move up to that many spaces in any direction. Anytime you move to a new space, you're simply going to say, hey, I'm going to move north here, and you're going to draw whatever level tile the one it's connecting to. All of these tiles can have up to 8 different connection sides to it. They're going to show open areas, and you simply place that in any area, either here or here as such, and then introduce any kind of information cubes to it. Now, there are some tiles when you move that have very specific door combinations, meaning for this one, you have to have a red cube on your board to even go into that area specifically. The other thing you need to pay attention to is that most of these tiles are going to have icons across the top. Anytime you move into these tiles, you have to do all of the actions on this tile from left to right. Most of the things are done when you're doing tests, but some of them are simply by moving into them, possibly introducing stairways to go deeper, teleportation things and stuff like that to move around. Once you're done with that, that's the meat of the thing you're going to do, and that's your action phase.
Yeah, the action phase is one step of the equation, but there's a number of different things that you can do. The first thing, and probably the biggest thing in this game, is studying.
Yeah.
When you study, you're going to look at the tile you're on, and you're going to determine how many of those cubes you want to pick up. Now, each of these tiles is going to have an awareness level. You have to match that or beat it with your stealth level in order to pick up a cube. If you want to pick up 2 cubes, it's going to be +1. If you want to pick up a 3rd cube, it's +3 total, all the way up to +6 in terms of this being a 2 +6. If I wanted to pick up all the cubes, that's going to be an 8 that I need to match.
Yeah.
Now, how do you do that? You're going to look at your trick cards. I'm going to be able to discard cards using this value in the upper left-hand corner and play them down and say, I'm going to collect X number of information cubes. Now, here's where the fun begins. Because after I've done that, and hopefully I've held on to some cards in my hand, we go around the table, starting on my left, player after player, and they're able to sort of mess with what you're trying to do.
Yeah, so the player on your left can play a card like this called Hide and Seek, which is going to raise the alert value by 1. Each player has the option of playing as many cards as they wish, and once it gets back to the original player, they can add cards on top of that to beat whatever that value is. If they succeed, they just get to collect those information cubes and place them on their board in the right colors. If they fail, though, a couple things are going to happen. They're forced to draw one from the bag, which can be bad because if you draw a red guy, it can jinx you. Also, you're going to take an exhaustion token. If anytime you have 3 of those, you are forced to rest on your turn. The other thing you can do is actually interact with another player and steal cubes from them. You're only allowed to steal 1, but it works in the same way. If David has a cube and I am in a location or the same place where he is, or in a linked adjacent location, meaning there's a doorway between me and him, I can actually try to steal one of his cubes using the same alert value and bonuses in the upper left-hand corner. And this is a thing between him and I where we're just simply trying to beat the value of the other player. Now, it's a little bit different. Depending upon the cube you're trying to steal equals the alert value. So if I'm stealing something from the civilization, it's only a 2. If I'm stealing a cast cube, it's a 6. Plus any of the scholars that he has on his board, or students that he has on his board. So if he has 6 students plus a 6 cast, that's a 12 value I have to overcome.
Yeah, this is called espionage, and it is equally valid to studying. Some of the characters are even better at this, so it depends on how you want to play your game. You can go around study, you can do some espionage, you can do a little bit of both to collect the cubes you have on your board.
The final action you can take in your turn is either taking an action on a card. Some of the cards will say action on them, and some of the tiles will give you actions that you can take. Again, you're only taking 1 action on your turn, so you get to pick from any one of those 3 possible things. Once you're done taking your action, you go to end of turn phase. There are a variety of things that can happen. At the end of your turn, you can discard any number of your trick cards that you want to the discard pile and draw back up to that according to your student value. And then you're going to be able to use any of your cards that say end of turn phase. There's a variety of cards that have some black bold on them that say end of turn that can only be used during that main portion. And you're going to keep doing this round after round until someone submits their thesis or until a number of different red guys have been drawn from the bag. Once that happens, a couple things are going to happen. Again, this card is going to be flipped up the moment either one of those things happens. This is going to speed up the game. Again, I could talk about all these, but there's a variety of different ones of panic cards that are going to introduce new elements into the game. This one is going to create darkness, meaning that you have to move towards the center, and each time that you don't, you're losing information cubes off your board. So there's an incentive to getting out of the dungeon. At the end of the game, you're going to get victory points. If you've submitted your thesis, you're going to get them according to what order you submitted them in. Everyone's going to get victory points for however many cubes they've collected on their board. You're going to get some victory points for any interns that you have, and you're going to lose victory points for all those jinx cards that you have.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is not purely a race to see who can submit their thesis first, because if someone does submit their thesis, everyone else goes into panic mode and they're trying to rush back there. Now, it's more difficult for them to do that, but it is entirely possible for one of those people to collect more points on the way to submitting their thesis as well.
So hopefully we gave you guys enough information about Dungeonology. It is truly a very unique dungeon crawler, one that we haven't played before by any means. Usually it's combat. This one is very different. You're using stealth, you're using your action cards in a variety of different ways. There's a lot of multi-use cards in this game. If you guys have any questions, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.